After 33 years in development jail, longtime fans of Akemi Yoshida were finally given a bone, as her seminal piece of work was released to the public in 2018. Helmed by Studio Mappa of Yuri on Ice and Hajime no Ippo fame, Banana Fish was brought to a new generation as we watched Ash Lynx fight to free himself from Dino Goldstein's grip. Bolstered by allies and rivals alike, Ash's quest would bind him with Eiji Okumura, a Japanese photographer who would get embroiled in his dangerous life. As the series reached its heated climax week after week, the atmosphere tensed as we all asked ourselves, how would Ash's story end? When the dust settled, no stone was left unturned. Some fans were heartbroken that the anime chose to stick to the manga's ending. Others made peace with the series and enjoyed the twists and turns that made it fun. But then, there's me. I had grown up with the series and, like many, considered it an influential part of my childhood. The series had gripped me again for its evolving art style, compelling storyline, and endearing lead, whom I immediately projected the parts of myself into that I liked, but also remixed the unsavory parts that didn't relate to me at all. This made my consumption of the series greatly biased, as I had blind spots to the parts of the series that didn't compel me as much. Furthermore, this would lead me to re-examine the legacy of Banana Fish today, without the filters of nostalgia and childhood. Together, we'll discover its shoujo origins, delve into its gestation as a retro-modern anime, and finally, we'll dive into the many perspectives on the series' powerful ending. My hope is that, upon the end of this video, you'll be compelled to dive into the series for yourself and gain a new perspective on how art can shape you. Born on August 12, 1956, Akemi Yoshida had a bit of success before Banana Fish, though it is her most renowned work to date. Starting in 1977, she would gain success with A Slightly Strange Neighbor, but would gain momentum later in 1978 with California Monogatari. In 1984, that momentum would propel itself with Kisho Tenio, and which would later get a musical soundtrack from Studio Ghibli composer Joe Hisaishi. Inspired by her love of American cinema, Yoshida penned Banana Fish from 1985 to 1994 in Betsukomi magazine. Though the reception was initially lukewarm, readers of all genders started to gravitate towards the series after the dramatic loss of Shorter Wong, Ash's best friend. By the manga's conclusion in 1994, the series would win multiple popularity polls, and by 2018, it would sell over 12 million copies in print. When it was released in North America, the series' adult themes had it labeled a seinen series, and it went to Viz Media's Pulp magazine. However, in doing so, the magazine had the series flipped, meaning you would be reading it from left to right, as opposed to the Japanese way of right to left. Furthermore, Banana Fish would also undergo significant censorship. However, after the folding of Pulp in 2004, Viz would later repent from these mistakes and would do 2 re-releases of the series. First in paperback between 2004 and 2007, unflipped and uncensored, then in digital form in 2018 to celebrate the release of its subsequent anime. After the publication of Banana Fish, Yoshida would later release assorted stories related to its universe, some of which detail significant relationships between the characters. Angel Eyes details Shorter and Ash's first meeting. Flyboy in the Sky recalls the meeting between Eiji and Ibe before the main series. Private Opinion details the meeting between Ash and Blanca, and more significantly, Garden of Light is set 7 years after the manga's events, where we revisit Eiji as an adult who has now settled in New York City as a photographer. Though initially underestimated, the Banana Fish manga would leave an impression on all who'd read it, as it would be known for subverting regular shoujo conventions, but also stay true to those same roots. So, with all this great reception and crossover success that endures to this day, one has to ask the question, why did it take 33 long years for this underappreciated treasure to be adapted into an anime? Well, let's try and answer that question. The year 2017. The place, Japan. Producer Kyoko Uryu had been part of the Aniplex animation company since 2012 and had since overseen multiple productions of popular anime, from the fantastic Vampire Knight Guilty to the comedic antics of Gintama the movie and the adventurous slugfest of the Seven Deadly Sins movie and television series. But none of them would hold up a candle to that of her beloved passion project that was Banana Fish. Having heard about the influential series from a friend in college, Uryu had devoured all 19 volumes in a single sitting. Forever enraptured by the character and resilience of its protagonist, Uryu's dedication to the series would continue into adulthood, as she grew determined to bring the Lynx's story to life. This fervent determination, coupled with the wish to commemorate the mangaka's 40 years of storytelling, likely contributed to the series getting a green light by Shogakukan and perhaps Yoshida herself, or at the very least, those representing her. Having pitched this document to the publishing giant for the past 5 years, Uryu-san would later describe her proposal as a love letter, a writing on how I envisioned the adaptation and conveyed my sincerest thoughts. In order to execute such a beloved vision, this would require assistance, so she recruited Hiroko Utsumi, fresh off her work from the Iwatobi Swim Club anime, aka Free, and later on, with Studio Mappa on board, screenwriter Hiroshi Seko and character designer Akemi Hayashi would join the fray to finish off the main team. Thus began the work of adapting what was once deemed unadaptable. How would it turn out? Released in 22-minute chunks of 24 episodes, the Banana Fish anime would run between July 5th and December 8th, 2018. Released on Fuji TV's Noitama programming block, it would also hold a simulcast release with Amazon Prime, who would add the subtitles in English. While the characters and the setting of America had been kept intact to keep the essence of the series, as was described by Uryu herself, the biggest change that drew attention was the timeline, as the contemporary setting of the 80s was replaced by the anime being set in the 2010s to better speak to current audiences. So while the manga's original conflict preceding it was the Vietnam War, the anime's preceding conflict was retrofitted to look back on the Iraq War during the 2000s. Along with the modernization of the timeline, character designs also went through an upgrade, with Hayashi-san choosing to add Shorter's mohawk, which was shaved off in the original manga, and she would also redesign Ash's overall look to resemble Yoshida-sensei's art style from the manga 7 volume afterwards. Physical characters weren't the only ones going through some change, as geographical characters would also have to be updated within the series. So Hiroko Utsumi and her team would later visit New York in order to recreate some of the series' most iconic locations, including Chinatown, Central Park, and the American Museum of Natural History. When asked about what she would like the fan reception to be on her new series, Uryu would respond with the hope that viewers would feel something fresh, yet at the same time see the original work shine through. So, with all of that hard work, were fans able to connect with Uryu's vision? So now, here we are in 2020. The Banana Fish anime has been released for 2 years now, and the manga has been re-released in English by Viz. The tale of Ash Lynx has been told in multiple formats: drawings, animation, sculptures, stuffings. Heck, his story was performed live on stage 3 times and adapted for the radio. Banana Fish is undeniably embraced by many, including manga translator Frederick L. Schultz, who'd write of the series in 1996 as one of the few girls manga a red-blooded Japanese male could admit to reading without blushing. This line of thinking would become frequent, as Anime News Network's Jason Thompson jokes, "Banana Fish is so manly, it passed as a seinen manga." When doing my research, I would note this repeating pattern, where the series' shoujo roots would be frequently dismissed again and again. Naji B from Manga Tokyo surmises, Yoshida's classic would seem better suited along seinen series like Akira rather than the pink-tinted covers of Viz Media's other shoujo offerings. Blogger Geek Girl reviews the series as seinen or dark shonen action series. And then spasms of free thoughts gushed that the series had angst, drama, guns, and violence, other themes that aren't frankly so work-safe for a typical shoujo audience. Despite Yoshida's own admission that she herself likes the unpredictability of shoujo, this prejudice would also carry throughout the anime's run as well. While the series was rewarded back home with the 2019 Top Anime Fan Award, Western reviewers would emphasize on Banana Fish's strong themes and penchant for action as an attempt to distance the series from being labeled Fujo bait, aka series created by women for women. Asterix. Here's where I'd like to note that so far, most of the voices referenced here have been cis and straight. These kinds of positive reviews have been placing the series as a paragon of virtue for its frankness and realism.
They show people actually willing to kill to survive in the streets. Real fight scenes that don't involve screaming loud until you win, with really no flashbacks. Child trafficking and what that can do to a person. Even going so far as to show how in prison you sometimes have to do fucked up things just to get by. I'm amazed by how good this story is written and paced.
So finally we have arrived to our main topic of the video. Why you should watch Banana Fish. And honestly, there are many reasons you should watch this series. The first being that it's one of the few anime out there to write gay characters competently. Too many times in the past you see a lot of anime like Citrus in the fall 2018 anime Bloom Into You try to have you forget the story because it's so boring that at the end of the episodes they just kiss to give you the illusion that important things are happening in the story, when in reality nothing is actually happening. It's just one thread repeated over 12 to 24 episodes. But in Banana Fish, the characters aren't just walking objects who want to fudge. They're written as real people, and the romance and random makeout scenes take a backseat to the more important story elements like the white powder Ash has in possession, for example. And sure, the story could easily take that turn and have them be walking horny bastards, but that is simply not what Banana Fish is about. The relationship between Eiji and Ash is one that is developed realistically and slowly over time without rushing things.
So likely one could ask, where are the voices that give nuance to the undertones of Ash and Eiji's relationship? And what about those who don't hold the series as a shining beacon of storytelling? Let's take a moment to highlight these opinions. For all the praise that Banana Fish has rightfully received for shining a light on such themes as child exploitation, sex trafficking, and abuse, among others, there have been notable viewpoints that do speak of the exploitative nature the series could lean towards. An example of this is raised by blogger Sarah Connor in her article on Anime Feminist. Although Yoshida thankfully chooses to leave the actual act of rape off the page, the way Ash's body is framed in the aftermath, as the camera lingers on his bruises or his bound wrists, can border on sexualizing. Continuing along these critical lines, when asked about the legacy of the Banana Fish series in Japan, a gay male reviewer would note that the only type of sex shown between men is rape. No acts of consensual sex is shown between male characters. This had me thinking about the depiction of sex in the series. Though it is treated as violence for the most part, not all depictions are treated the same. While Ash and Eiji's love is framed as asexual due to Ash's transactional nature to sex, non-binary blogger Marion B. of Otaku She Wrote reminds us that Charlie and Nadia have a manga-only relationship that is not only sexual, but said sexuality is framed as positive. There's a heterosexual alternative of consensual sex. We don't only know that Charlie and Nadia are together, we are given enough information to know for sure they're having sex. While their relationship is cut from the anime due to brevity, Marion would also note that the other notable relationship to be presented as a positive second would be that of Jessica and Max, who could be coded as being parallels with Ash and Eiji. However, one could note that these parallels end when looking at the framing of Jessica's trauma against Ash. Coherent Cats blogger Malia note that Ash is unable to escape his sexual trauma, and it's framed as an almost grotesque Ouroboros around him, in which, because of his physical beauty, he's abused and preyed upon, but because he's smart enough to escape his abusers, he's further abused and preyed upon later. In fact, the rest of the quote theorizes how Jessica is shown to survive, and even one can theorize thrive, by being reunited with Max. But by contrast, Ash, having gone through significant trauma, is not only forever separated from IG, but one could say even punished by death. In the end, Ash's death seems to signal that there is little possibility for the future beyond suffering, at least outside of the heteronormative nuclear family, which is how Jessica gets her happy ending. So, with all of these various perspectives out of the way, we have an idea that the Banana Fish series has definitely had an impact on everybody, and no one is left unimpressed. I'd like to have one more conversation before we finish, and that's to talk about how Ash himself came to be. One can go on about the influence that Ash Lynx had on you, me, and the world at large, but at some point, we gotta talk about the handsome elephant that inspired him. Or rather, handsome Phoenix. Let's take a moment to discuss River Phoenix. For a bit of a refresher, River Phoenix was an American actor who'd shown great promise in the 80s and 90s, taking on teen roles such as Rob Reiner's Stand By Me and playing along cinema greats like Sidney Poitier in Little Nikita. His strong presence would continue into his adulthood, as he'd become known for playing a beloved hustler, Mike, in My Own Private Idaho, and a PSTD-riddled Marine in Running on Empty. River's magnetic charm and presence would also follow him off-screen, as he'd be loved for his activism and music. However, despite all the love the world had for him, River's personal struggles would prove to be too much. At the young age of 23, we would lose River from drug complications, leaving his girlfriend and grief-stricken family behind on October 31st, 1993. When news of his death went around the world, Yoshida-san would join those in mourning, as she'd remember River's beautiful eyes, always looking ahead, and his strong will. This fondness for the actor would begin at the movie theater, where Yoshida would recall River's captivating looks after watching Mosquito on the Coast. His handsome face and striking features would be greatly incorporated, as she would base River's likeness on Ash's designs. Having met the actor at a 1991 press conference, Yoshida was so set on the young man that when she had news of Banana Fish getting a film deal, she'd want Phoenix to get the role, as their similarities would be undeniable. But the news of his death would forever dash those big-time dreams. In fact, the impact of his death would cause so much of a stir that the mangaka would later confess of a conflict on whether Ash should suffer the same fate as his real-life counterpart. For better context, let's do one more loop back in time to situate the world. The year 1993. The date, November 9th. On this day, Yoshida-sensei would pen a heartfelt series of notes and drawings in a magazine commemorating the death of River Phoenix. At the tail end of what could be called a tumultuous year, a lot had already happened to add to these last 2 weeks of mourning. We had highs like the Clinton inauguration and the 10-year anniversary of Disneyland, but we also had great lows, such as the Waco siege in Texas, a series of recurring earthquakes and floods, and the unforeseen stabbing of a 19-year-old tennis phenomenon, Monica Sales. Don't worry, she's okay. Adding to this hullabaloo was the tankobon release of the 17th Banana Fish volume on October 26th. Readers would gawk on in shock as Eiji's own fate became compromised after a surprise attack by Yu Lung's henchmen. Enveloped by unbridled fury, Ash would retaliate by unleashing blood and bullets. One assailant would get a bullet to the head, while another would barely get away with his life before Ash was restrained by Singh and his former mentor Blanca. This murderous act would also gain him a new enemy, as Sing's half-brother, Lao Yantai, would defect from the team, refusing to pledge loyalty to someone with no regard or care for anyone else's life. After the incident, Ash would later confess to Cain Blood that he would agree with Lao's version of himself, as he believed himself to be a monster. While Cain would disagree with Ash, Ash would be unconvinced, later pleading that Eiji's life not be taken, but that his would be instead. In an interview with manga critic Yukari Fujimoto, Yoshida would reveal that despite the real-life tragedy that occurred, Ash's fate had long been sealed due to the nature of his dangerous lifestyle. In reality, people dying young is a terrible tragedy, so I thought maybe I shouldn't go there. But when it comes down to it, Ash is a killer. I feel that regardless of what might have been behind the killings, people who take another person's life need to make up for it with their own life. So that's why I wrote that ending. This moralistic viewpoint would spawn various interpretations later on, with one Japanese reader reconciling Ash's death by claiming he'd attained freedom and true love in his death. Tumblr user Ang of Words wouldn't initially dispute Yoshida's worldview, but did understand it, stating that in the manga's world, Ash had no recourse to assist with his mental health, therefore, there's no one on hand to help him. Bleeding out is his only choice, and so he chooses to do so with Eiji's feelings right there, in his head. He chooses the only bright path left, to die loved and not alone. Later on, while they would express their disgust with Yoshida's perspective, they would also cement themselves on this fatalistic viewpoint. The manga does have a grim ending. Yoshida didn't have to go there. There are at least a dozen satisfying endings that she could have written instead. But I maintain that, once Lao got him, this was it. His path was clear. Looking at most of the other reviews, a lot of the arguments tend to echo this fatalistic point of view, giving the impression that no one in the fandom believes an alternative is possible. But thankfully, there are a few dissonants. One of them being Marion B., who reminds us that to kill Ash as an act of punishment is questioning a logic that allows plenty of banana fish to work in the first place. To suggest that Ash, the power fantasy, but never had any choice, is deserving of punishment when characters who killed, like Sing and Jessica, walk away unquestioned, is daring to ask if the survivor is just as bad as the monsters he fought against. But the most eye-opening rebuttal would come from Coherent Cats blogger Malia, who reminds us that the updated anime never takes the opportunity to highlight the newer resources that would be available for Ash today. In 2018, we not only examine the harm of sexual trauma, but also life with and beyond it. Many people who have suffered do not exist in isolation, but have found ways to come together and speak their truth. Because lest we forget that as gritty and as dramatic as Banana Fish is, we're not just rooting for Ash because of his charm or his relationship with Eiji. We're rooting for him because we know that he, along with those like him, deserve to know that there is a world beyond the one that they know of. One world where he will be embraced and welcomed for all that he is. So, with all that introspection done, here are 4 things I've taken from this essay. 1. Banana Fish is unmistakably shoujo, and should be appreciated as such. It has a sensibility and a candor that can't be expressed anywhere else. Banana Fish walked so that Yuri on Ice could skate, and My Brother's Husband could melt into your hearts. So go watch these things, go read these things. 2. Don't give up on your dreams. Kyoko Ryu had gone through sweat, tears, and a lot of heartache in these 5 years, but through patience and perseverance, she was able to express her heart's desire and Shogakukan, and I'm sure Yoshida eventually responded to it. 3. Follow your heart, because it'll never lead you astray. In fact, it'll save you from gangsters when you're trying to escape an evil Don's mansion. And 4th thing, when I first started this essay, I thought my thesis would be simple. Ash Lynx is the best boy. Here's why. But then, as I'm revisiting his story, I'd be exposed to all these different points of view. Within his own world, Ash is seen as a genius, a marksman, or an object of lust, while Word of God calls him a killer, and the fandom deifies him as a tragic hero. But I would go with the stance that Ash is not only all of these identities, but in fact, someone who should be seen beyond that. To me, Ash is a boy of many talents, but he is also just a boy. Someone with a heart that deserves to be loved. And for me, that makes Ash a sort of queer anti-hero. One that we received, but we definitely didn't deserve.